over to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Barbara Smith, and this is my partner, Christian McNeill. And Christian and I wrote a book entitled Addiction, One Cause, One Solution. And we started this series to talk a little bit more in depth about what we wrote and how it impacts the field of addiction and the way that we've seen it. So the book itself describes a new understanding of mental health and addiction that we're calling the inside out understanding. And it has helped us as well as tens of thousands of people around the world. And so we're anxious to share that more with you, wherever you are in your recovery, or if you're a professional, or if you are just interested in the topic, or you have someone who is struggling in your family or loved one who's struggling in addiction, we think you'll find the simple wisdom contained in this understanding to be very liberating. So we're going to start each session by talking a little bit about different sections of the book. And then at the end of our talking, which will be about 20 minutes to 30 minutes into the webinar, we're going to turn off the recording so that people can feel free to share in a confidential way anything or have any questions. So that's where things are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks very much. So tonight the topic's more about thought, and it occurred to me just when I was listening to you there, Barbara, that many people I work with and introduced to this work seem to pick up an idea that there's something about this that's about positive thinking, or thinking happy thoughts, or something along those lines, especially when they're introduced to the idea and can accept the idea that our feelings are coming from our thoughts. But for me, well, that's definitely not how I see it, and it's definitely not how it's worked for me. And in fact, an absolutely liberating concept, if you like, that I came across right at the beginning when I was introduced to the principles was that variability in thinking and in mood is the norm rather than the exception, that it's absolutely human and healthy and inevitable that there will be this up and down, or in and out, or however you want to express it. And for me, in an instant, it was it was like a burden being lifted from my shoulders that I didn't even know was there, because I had been trying for at least the 20 odd years since I got sober. I'd been trying very hard and working very hard at being more positive, being more serene, just all of that stuff, and it didn't work. And every time it didn't work, every time I had a low day or a bad day, or I wasn't sober minded, there was a judgment against myself. So that negative stuff could really kind of spiral out of control. And I don't even think this variability thing was something that Sid spoke about a lot, although funnily enough, I was listening to one of his old tapes just in the last couple of days, and in that he's saying, it's normal to be angry, it's normal to be jealous, it's normal to be insecure, and he wasn't advocating those. He was just saying that they were inevitable, and that they were as inevitable as being content and happy and connected and loving and all of that. So yeah, it's I really love this piece, and the way it was represented in that first seminar that I was on, was somebody just drew a squiggly line on the board and said that this is what we all do, and 20 years of trying just dissolved in that moment. And I thought, I can live with that. I'm there already. I'm good enough. It's good enough. It's normal. And I did put that a copy of that diagram up in the group again, just shortly before we came on the call. And I thought that I might just read a small piece from the group, just from the book, just one paragraph at page 26. And it kind of goes into that a little more deeply, because one of the things that I had bought into in my period of searching prior to stumbling across the principles was the idea that every low mood was kind of evidence of some kind of pathology or the disease of addiction. And I was beginning already to have doubts about that. I was really beginning to question it. But it's what we wrote in the book is this: if every natural low is treated as a symptom rather than a natural occurrence, a web of concern and self-judgment is spawned, often leading to an even more distressed state. It supports false diagnoses. On the other hand, when we can relax into the ebb and flow of human moods, we tend to appreciate the peaceful ones more and allow the lows to pass through rather than resisting, judging, and amplifying them. And there's just something in that in common with much of the work of the inside out understanding that is so immediate, that each of us is right now enough and whole and complete, and there's nowhere to get to. Happiness isn't a destination of 90 days of hard work or 3 years of hard work or anything like that. That in any moment we can come back to the Joe, could you switch your camera off, please? In any moment, we're just back to being present, being here, being enough, existing, and that's incredibly hopeful for me, and it feels very comforting to know that everything I need is here right now. And even that ebb and flow of thought is just entirely natural. But of course, it doesn't always look like that. And none of this is to underplay the power of thought. I'm always, when we have one of these webinars coming up, I spend a little bit of time just, contemplating what might come up, what we might talk about. And one of the things that occurred to me is that, particularly in the field of addiction, it's often said that the craving, I'll talk about drink in my case, the craving to drink, which is my principal addiction, if you like, is made of thought, which of course is true. I mean, if I haven't taken drink in, the desire, the motivation, the impetus to go for a drink is indeed made of thought. But that doesn't imply that it can be controlled or mastered or changed at will, to me. And I've heard some of our colleagues talk about the experience of sort of sitting out a craving. For me, that's never worked. And the thing that came to me in advance of today's call was I was thinking that a craving can be so powerful, and it's the thing that it reminded me of. The other is that sense of when you've fallen in love with someone, where there's that initial obsession, and there's no way that in my experience that can be switched off at will. That it's not something that is in control of the ego. But nevertheless, to my mind, it's useful to know what we're dealing with, that even if I can't switch off a craving or the sense of obsession for drink or for another person, even if I can't switch it off at will, simply knowing that it's thought and nothing more sinister than that, that there's it gives me hope. It's useful to know, because it's also in the. Joe, I wonder if you could mute yourself. it's also in the nature of thought to change, and even if on a given occasion I give into a craving, it's never in the nature of thought to be there permanently. It's just always, thought is always flowing through us. To my mind, we're not responsible for the thoughts that come into our head. We can't direct or control them. But having an awareness of the fact of thought, of the power of thought, enables me to have a somewhat different relationship to it, to feel less of a victim, and to be more of an observer, or someone who's aware of the phenomenon. So those are some of the thoughts that have been playing around in my head when we're talking more about thought tonight. And perhaps if I park it there, Barbara, and hand it over to you and see what you've got to say.
Well, for me, the thing that's so powerful about this understanding is that we, rather than feeling that there's something we have to do about our thinking, like, you know, I have often said, I may have said on this already, that you know, we used to be in psychotherapy, we used to be in the thought manipulation business. There are all these different types of thought therapies, cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, you know, all kinds. And the way that I see now this deeper understanding of thought, of universal thought, of the power of thought, I like to see it as a reflection of all that is in nature. Because it is, you know, it isn't separate. Our psychology isn't like some weirdo, you know, attachment that got tacked on as a last afterthought. It is a reflection of all that is, this energy that is pulsing through us at every moment. And so I just wanted to read a paragraph from the book that I found particularly helpful. Actually, it was something that Christian helped me to see more clearly in writing it. Human beings are a mixture of both these variabilities. Because our modes are creative by ever-flowing stream of thought running through us, they are less predictable. There is one constant, however, and that is that we are always feeling the thought we engage with. But the flow of thought is largely beyond our control. And that, rather than a disorder, is what creates the ups and downs of all human experiences. And that's actually not the paragraph I wanted to read, so I'm just going to go ahead to the top one, saying, human beings, along with everything else in the natural world, exhibit rhythms and variabilities. Some natural rhythms are predictable, like the tides or the hours of daylight. Others, like the weather, are less predictable. So a lot of the people in the principles world, the people who share this understanding, do talk about it like the weather. You know, a lot of the Buddhist meditators and things talk about thought being like clouds or like a ticker tape, or, you know, so there is a moving weather of it, if you will. So, you know, when people joke around, where, you know, one of the terms that a lot of people find very helpful is when we talk about a thought storm, when thoughts will gather just like storms do, storm clouds do. But just like every storm or every storm system, we're expecting two this coming week, one coming from the south and one coming from the west or the east. You know, that will create a certain experience while it's here, but then it passes all on its own without our having to do anything. And that in and of itself just gives us so much freedom. You know, one of the things my clients just love to hear is there's nothing you have to do. Like, you don't have to let it pass, it just does. So you don't have to let the sun come up or the tides come in and out. So again, just to see this in a deeper level, to me, is really to see it as that reflection of all it is in nature and the deeper truth about how it all works.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to a podcast earlier in the week, and it was a guy called Tim Ferriss, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, and he was interviewing Hugh Jackman, the Wolverine guy, the Greatest Showman. And it was, you know, it was an interesting podcast, and they're both interesting people, but they were um, talking at length. I mean, it's a very long podcast, nearly 2 hours, and they were talking at length about all the things that Hugh Jackman did on a daily basis, and he's clearly not someone who's got a problem with addiction or is in recovery or anything like that, at least as far as I know. But it was just, man, it was exhausting. It really reminded me of my kind of recovery days, and every time I felt I went through the kind of thought storm that you're talking about, Barbara, you know, I felt I had to add something else into the mix, because that was evidence that I wasn't getting it right. And you know, and like you just said there, I just love that there is so little to do, you know, just so little to do. And I mean, not that one can't do whatever you feel like, you know, if you feel like meditating, meditate, but none of that is necessary. That awareness is the key. That you know, awareness of how the system actually works. It's as simple as that. And even if that awareness is patchy, even if you know, that just continuing to just gently look in this direction, and things will change and life will ease. It seems to be that's been my experience.
And mine as well. As mine as well. Yeah. I think it puts us in a flow, you know, if you will. There is kind of a flow to life energetically. And when we aren't swimming against the current, you know, and we really are in the flow, it just makes life a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as we said earlier in one of the other podcasts, we were saying that, or webinars, we were saying that, you know, that when we don't identify ourselves by a disease or by a problem or by a diagnosis, and we start pointing towards the innate health that we all have, and the perfection of the way in which the system actually operates, you know, there's a freedom that comes with that is extraordinary. And you know, again, we're not like white knuckling it, trying to get, trying to hold on until, you know, something happens in our external world. We really have this more internal focus where we can see where the issue is coming from, and then just to sort of relax into the knowing of how it all works and how, you know, the flow will move on. So I think it sounds so simple to most people that it's almost hard to believe. You know, a lot of people who learn about the principles will say, you know, you got to be kidding. You know, how is it that we could have missed this all this time? And as one of my clients said, it felt like there's always been this carrot dangling right in front of my nose, and I've just never seen it. But we just simply and innocently didn't know. I mean, well, a lot of people did. A lot of people just kind of got it. But once you have this understanding under your belt, it makes our lives so much easier. Instead of having to wait for the circumstances of our life to change in order for us to be okay, you know, we just really are like, okay, well, here we are. You know, it gives us this natural, we already have this natural buoyancy. Doesn't give it to us, but the understanding helps us to see that we have this natural buoyancy, that we can, you know, regain our balance so much more quickly than when we think. And again, there's this world of invisible thought that you walk around with when you've been given a diagnosis that you have this problem that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. And that becomes a story that then becomes the day-to-day reality of your existence. And once you see through that and you see, oh, well, that's not the way it is, that's not how things work, again, it sets you free to really experience life as it's actually happening in this moment.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that occurred to me when you were speaking there, Barbara, is that it's very comforting to know that absolutely everything that I see as a problem is essentially a thought. And by that, I don't mean that there aren't events in the world, but that events are only problematic because of my thoughts and beliefs, visible or invisible about them. And it's helpful just knowing that. So I had a day last week where one of those days where kind of everything went wrong, and lots and lots of fairly minor, but just it seemed like just one thing after the other. I couldn't turn around without creating hassle. And at one point, I met up with a friend. I said, "God, I just really feel really low," and I mean, some of them were sort of bigger things that were weren't just touching me, but they were were touched my whole community and so on. But then a point came and I thought, yeah, of course, it's not the things. It's just with each of those, it's my own thinking about it that's giving me that is creating the sense of distress, frustration, upset, depression. Well, depression would be over the top, but sadness or complaint about it. And it didn't even. It was interesting because until that point I'd forgotten some of what we know, as it were. But then I come back to that and think, oh yes, of course it's my own thinking, and it dissolves. And very little of the outside events have changed. The things that I saw as so problematic, but they're no longer. I am no longer having that thinking about them. So I am no longer feeling whatever I was feeling, that sense of lowness or insecurity or confusion and frustration. And there seems to me, I mean, again, this is my experience, it's maybe not everybody's, but there was a kind of tipping point where I got that really the whole of my life experience is thought created. And therefore, every time I'm in a low mood, that's the only thing I'm dealing with. The only thing that really is a problem is how I'm thinking about the situation. And that was comforting to me, that there's only one place to look, and that the nature of that place is that it's transient anyway. Yeah.
One of the things that as you were talking, it occurred to me that, we talk a lot about invisible thought and the fact that much of our thinking is invisible to us and that it's unconscious. So it's been estimated that somewhere between 75, and I just read a book that said like 99% of our thinking is unconscious. We're not aware of it. So when you can, whether or not you understand or can see the thinking that's creating your experience, the fact that this understanding turns you around in a way to look in the right direction, allows us, I think, to start to begin to open up channels for awareness, to see some of the things that have been hidden from our view up to this point. So it's interesting for me as I work with a lot of clients now, seeing how various people in going through this pandemic and the changes that are happening in the world, some go to depressive thinking that creates depression, and others go to extremely anxious thinking that goes to anxiety. And when I was taking a walk a couple of weeks ago, I noticed that my sort of recurrent go-to feeling state that kept coming up from time to time was despair. I was like, well, that's really interesting that it's despair. So number one, I got really interested in that because I really understand now. I really get that that awareness is curative. And I'm very curious about what it is I don't see that causes me these feeling states, you know? So I was like, despair, interesting, despair. It was almost like I was tasting despair for a minute. And then it was like, oh, you've been doing that since you were like a teenager when you were reading Jean-Paul Sartre and, you know, all of the existentialists. Like you used to define yourself as an existentialist when you were in graduate school, and you were like, oh, isn't that interesting? That was like a self-made story that you'd walked around with for years and years and years. And it looked so comfortable and so true to you that the world was coming to an end and it was all meaningless. And then all of a sudden I could see it. And once I saw it, it was like, oh, now I don't have to keep going there anymore. Like that awareness was so transformative for me to see that story that was completely, I really wasn't connected to that at all until I turned to it with the curiosity and this understanding that, okay, your feeling of despair is coming from what you're thinking about. And what is that story that you're not seeing at this point? So once I saw it, it was like, wow, look at that. And then I started seeing more and more. And today, this morning on my walk, I started seeing even more, like, oh, look at where you go to. You're putting your focus on all these people who are doing things that are going to bring about the end of the world, you know? And it was like, well, how about if you just look at that, you know, and maybe just offer them love and understanding. And that was really freeing. So it's just been an amazing process when we can see our thinking, as we become more and more curious about these invisible things that are driving our psychological state and our sense of wellness in the world. And to realize that as you start to become more aware of them, they set you free and you don't have to keep going back there. Or if you do go back there, it's no big deal. It's just a habit that your mind, it's a mental habit that your mind does. So for addicts, you know, and I think we might want to just talk about this briefly, Christian, before we turn it over. But for addicts, you know, what the invisible thinking for most addicts that they have on their mind is using, you know. So I just wanted to read something a little bit out of the book, that what do most addicts have on their mind much of the time? Using. How to get it, how to hide it, covering the lies, fear of not having it, fear of withdrawal, efforts to control it, protecting the secrets, trying to look normal, manipulating the addiction, manipulating to keep the addiction going, and last but not least, glorifying the feeling of being high, however short-lived that may be. So I don't know if you wanted to say something more about that, Christian.
Yeah, I was just, I was just identifying with that somewhat, and also, you know, just that thinking that it begs the question. So what do you do about it? And again, for me, it comes back to it's not about trying to change the thought, but it's, we touched on, more than touched on, the fact of awareness, becoming aware of how the system's working. That's part of it. And also what came through to me when you were talking about your reflection on despair during your walk is that there's something powerful about sharing, about being really honest, you know, and it doesn't involve, it doesn't necessarily have to involve sharing with another person or a group or going to something, but starting to, you know, that real honesty, at least with myself, is one of the things that I think that can be helpful. And also just the acknowledgement of the extraordinary essence of who we are, that capacity to channel the power of thought is such a gift. It's a, you know, it's a part of being human. It's a gift of being human, and that whether the thoughts and feelings are positive or negative, and whether they're powerful or weak, that we're not broken. That in the doing of that, in the sharing of that we are, that in itself is a capacity of our essence. You know, it's part of our creative source, that the ability, and in fact the inevitability in being human, of creating this virtual reality experience. Is quite an extraordinary capacity that we have. And so seeing that you know, the whole of it differently, having a different take on it can be really helpful. And it also seems to me that the moment I'm not fighting my experience, peace returns. The moment I am willing to be okay with it, peace increases. That peace of mind comes back. And for me, it sounds so sort of counterintuitive, but for me, the more there's this acceptance of myself, of the experience of the now, the more quickly thought and feeling just moves through. The more I'm back in flow, the more I'm at ease and peaceful and comfortable. And for me, that's one description of our essential spiritual state, if you like. And it's not contingent on getting happy first, or getting peaceful first, or getting beyond the craving first. That in whatever way I kind of show up, just being okay with that is enough. I don't need to improve myself or do better first. Something about just accepting, you know, where I am right now, or where any of us are right now. Do you have anything else, Barbara? Would this be a good
time
to open it up?
I think maybe we're ready to. There are a couple of questions, or at least one.